Hello, everyone. Welcome to another interview for our Sensibility edition for August. My interviewee today is Jeff Haller, who is a prominent figure in the Feldenkrais method. And my own experience of him is paying attention to what he says for a number of reasons. One of which is because I'm a martial artist and I've heard some of the things that he said that have appealed to me because of the way that he's talked about sort of dynamic strength, balance in your system, and how to be kind of potent and strong, but also mobile. Jeff himself has some background in these things. He's been an Aikido expert, a black belt. I don't remember exactly when it was. Maybe you can just correct me on that. And also played basketball during your life, and obviously has been teaching the Feldenkrais method for a number of years.
40 years.
40 years, an exact number of years. So I'm really grateful to Jeff for coming on, and I think that this is going to be a very interesting conversation. We have spoken about a couple of things just before this, so we have kind of a sense of where this is going to go. But Jeff has a lot of knowledge in this area, and I am very interested in picking his brain. So welcome, Jeff. I don't know if there's anything else that you would want to add to my introduction.
No. Thank you very much for having me.
Great. So today, obviously this edition, what we're looking at is the relevance of Feldenkrais to like high performance athletes, the relevance of it in terms of like developing strength or dynamicism in your movement, and why would an athlete or someone that's interested in getting stronger or getting faster or more dynamic come to the Feldenkrais method? What would be the reason for them, or what would they be able to gain from looking at Feldenkrais? So along those lines, one of the first things that we've discussed talking about is around the subject of posture. So you mentioned to me previously that you've worked with some people that have had injury, and that has directly affected their ability to maintain posture or to perform at the level that they were at. So maybe that's a really nice starting point for this discussion.
Okay, so this is a great place for us to start, but I think the first thing we have to understand is the dynamic view that Feldenkrais had of what posture is, what good posture is.
Yeah.
And so Moshe considered good posture to be the freedom to move in any direction without hesitation or preparation. And of course, this is dependent upon how specific and how capable we are of using the surfaces that we're on, the ground, in order to generate activity. The ground always affords us our possibilities. And so the question for athletes is how do I become efficient? How do I generate force through myself in the most specific, coordinated, and comprehensive way possible in order to reach the outcome that I want with the minimal amount of disturbance? And so in order to do that, we have to understand some things. We have to understand the nature of well, let's go back 375 million years, just for the moment. And the first tetrapods that came onto the planet, we have to understand that their nervous system, they didn't do push-ups. Their nervous system became organized so that their musculature was organized to lift them away from the ground. They learned to move themselves by the way that they could lift themselves from the ground. Mm-hmm. That means within them, they had the means to organize their skeleton for activity. And this part of our nervous system is deeply, deeply and profoundly intact within us, and we don't train it. We're so interested in training our athletes in explosive muscular movement, but we are not necessarily great at providing a person with the sense of the very specific ways of finding the support through ourselves in such a way that we can move our skeleton through space in the most effective and efficient manner. This means that in order to do that, we have to set up a completely different process by which the athlete can develop their own renewed or new sense of coordination.
Mm.
Because for the most part, if we look very carefully at the way that most athletes engage in gravity, in the field of gravity, they're actually engaging in spending a lot of their time in the field of gravity compensating for gravity. That means they're having to stabilize themselves in the field of gravity because they don't use force efficiently. And
Okay.
so for us as Feldenkrais practitioners, one of the things that we have a real knack for is helping a person find out what it is to be efficient, effective, and to utilize their musculature in a way that's effective, rather than having to use their musculature to prevent falling or to stabilize themselves. They can use it for the activity that they want.
Yeah. So a follow-up question, just to kind of dig into that a little bit, is that if I were an athlete and I would kind of think about this process, I might think what you're saying to me sounds good, but in some way, because of the training that I've had, or the way that I've learned how to move, just as being an athlete, that it wouldn't necessarily make sense to me to kind of come away from traditional training models, where it's just like, I need to improve my muscular system, I need to improve the explosiveness, or in some way, what you're saying is a paradigm shift in some way, that there's something to be said for kind of going back to a more fundamental aspect of movement that would allow them to develop greater efficiency. But there's some sort of like some process of coming back from the high level of performance or ability that they have into a more fundamental part of their existence. And I wonder if you could say something about that. Like, is that an easy process?
Well, it's an easy process, but it's extraordinarily complex and difficult.
Okay.
because like you said, it's a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
It's a shift away from producing outcomes and doing the thing that you've done in order to produce outcomes for the sense of some sense of defining yourself, as opposed to being in the quest for how can I within myself find the most effective way to do what I want to do, which takes me into a very different way of being in question.
Yeah.
Because the typical process of training an athlete is basically mindless, in the sense that the point is effort is the point.
Yeah.
Whereas in our method, the specificity of awareness and attention to detail is the point, which is a huge shift, which requires the athlete to be in the state of listening to what's possible rather than using their will to achieve what's possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, let's take an example so that everybody can understand.
Right.
Okay, so last year I worked with an NHL hockey player who was concussed, and in the concussion he had a big bruise and a hit on his left cheek. Yeah. In the same injury, he broke his ribs on his left side, and at the time he was recovering from a knee surgery in his right knee. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
What happened to that man's world?
Quite a big disturbance.
It's a big disturbance. It's a huge disturbance. Yeah. This is a game where you're at top speed going 40 miles an hour. You're going backwards and forwards. You're playing with a long stick with a little biscuit, and you're bouncing the biscuit off the boards, and you're playing in geometry, and you're moving in space with the intention to throw this biscuit into a goal that has a really big guy in front of it.
Yeah. And you need to be pretty accurate to do so.
You need to be extraordinarily accurate, and you need to have a sense of 360 degrees, the dimension of the game.
Yeah.
You can't be limited in any way. Now, when I began to examine this man, the moment that I began to turn his head to the left to help him turn, there was a tremendous restriction.
Right.
And it wasn't necessarily a muscular restriction.
Okay.
His system was in compensation because the moment that his head went to the left, in that very first moment, he reflected upon the injury, the process by which he was hit.
Yeah.
So in a microsecond, he's back in the situation of how he was hit. His system is trying to compensate to protect him from being injured further.
Yeah.
Right? His ribs were broken on the left side. He had 2 broken ribs with this injury.
Yeah.
Now, so that means that he was incredibly restricted in his ability. He's not able to look left, and he's not able to turn freely right or left.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nor is he able to stand clearly on his with his right foot for support.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So then the question is, and every athlete has some degree of this, the degree to which their way of being in the world has been affected by some level of compensation, or ignorance, what they don't know that they don't know. Yeah. Now, so how there's no process. He can do physical therapy, he can do training, he can be in the weight room. He's not going to relearn how to reorient himself in space in 360 degrees. To be able to find, for example, that he can find a clear line, the sense of rotation within himself from the source of his skeleton, that he can learn to coordinate anew. And carry his skeletons, carry himself from the ground, from the ice, through his skates, up and through his skeleton, find the means within both legs to find support, the support through his skeleton, the ability to find his spine, to carry his head so that he can recover the ability to be in 360 degrees so he can play the game he loves and supports his family with.
It's a really good example, because I can't think of like what you're saying is that this is a very fundamental skill that, maybe is accessible to us as we learn to organize ourselves through childhood, and whatever's happened to him in his life, the injury, the leg injury, the impact, has taken away a skill that isn't necessarily accessible again or immediately through retraining, let's say, or through technique, through the existing ways of training that he's got. Like, let me try and improve my strike, or get my legs stronger, or I don't know how NHL hockey players train, but I don't imagine that their training would allow him to come back to this sort of like fundamental self-organization to redevelop that skill of turning in a way that would be effective for him.
The compensation stays hidden. And all training is built on top of the compensation. It's a chink in the armor. And so the degree to which the person is diminished by the degree that which that the compensation stays intact within them. Feldenkrais said in Amherst at one point in time that we when we're working with a person, we want to help them become better than they were before. This means that this man, when I worked with him, the point was for him to gain a knowledge of himself and a skill level with himself that was superior to what he had before, because you can't make the broken ribs, you can't make the knee surgery go away, but his ability to coordinate his entire self could be significantly higher. That this injury provided an opportunity through awareness, through movement, and through functional integration for him to find an integration of himself that was superior to the way he was even before the injury.
But do you think that part of the issue is that people don't necessarily know that it's possible to do that?
It's absolutely. I mean, that's the paradigm shift, and it's a difficult paradigm for the public. Because the public, the view in the general paradigm for the public is exactly as we know: strength, range of motion, speed, quickness, plyometric training, all the different kinds of training that we have, which have within it all a huge amount of limitations, because the fact of the matter is that the person is taking their compensation into that training, and they're simply training the compensation without knowing it.
Yeah.
They're creating their own internal chink in their armor and don't know it.
Yeah.
At some point in time, that explosive training will, and oftentimes ends up working against them, creating forces somewhere else in the system,
where another injury will become,
where another injury is on, and we don't even know the source of it.
Yeah. Could you maybe say, I mean, you've given one example in terms of the NHL player, in terms of compensation, that I think is quite a clear example, but do you have another example?
I think before we go there, I think we need to take an extra moment and just recognize the degree to which that man's perception of himself in the world was reduced.
Yeah. Okay.
How small his world became. I mean, in other words, if I get hit and I have that whole protective flexion within myself, imagine for yourself what happens with the ability of your eyes. The moment you flex into yourself, what happened to your field of vision?
Yeah.
What happened to your sense of breath?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Narrowed. What happened to your breath? Your breath is reduced.
Yeah, and right? I almost don't want to turn left or right anymore.
Exactly. The system is there to protect itself from further injury, and will not give up that protection until there's something better.
Yeah.
So and you can't train out of it. If he would have trained himself out of that, he would have maintained within himself some degree to which there was turning left was not going to be available to him. The ability for his ribs wasn't going to be, the whole 360-degree coordination of himself wasn't going to be available.
Yeah.
In other words, the way that he was innervating himself from the protection to spread that level of protection and compensation through his central nervous system to maintain the image of protection.
Yeah.
So that is a message through the central nervous system to maintain something that is self-preservation, to preserve his own.
And that's a very strong instinct, you know.
It has primacy in the nervous system.
Yeah.
Along with orientation. So until a person has a sense of orientation and a sense that they're safe in the world, they're not free to move.
Yeah.
Now when we go the extra step, and that person once again recovers a profound sense of being in the world in 360 degrees, they find that they coordinate their balance and their breath and the organization of their eyes for being in vision, and the capacity to ambulate and to manipulate and bring all of this back together in such a way that you can interact with the world.
Yeah. Like it's an ideal starting point, and we are coming at the things that we do from an unideal starting point.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, but to move to that starting point is against everything. That's why it's so difficult to spread the work of the Feldenkrais method in one sense, because I was at a unfortunate party the other night. It was it was a memorial service, but there was a woman that I met 20 years ago who was originally a sprinter at one of the universities near here. And I can tell you that she ran 400-meter hurdles.
Yeah.
Big, powerful, strong, dynamic woman.
Yeah.
And she came up to me and she said, "I've just discovered the Feldenkrais method. You told me 20 years ago, you told me 20 years about the Feldenkrais method. I didn't understand. You wanted me to make all these slow movements."
Yeah.
And here I was, a sprinter. I didn't, what would I want to do these slow movements for?
Yeah.
And she says, now I have these particular difficulties, and I found a practitioner. They live on the East Coast now.
Yeah.
And she said, I didn't have an idea of what it was that you were talking about. And now it makes complete sense to me.
Yeah.
And that's often the case.
Yeah. But it's like at that point, she's no longer in that kind of like process of sprinting or like she's not a hurdler anymore, I would imagine, but she's dealing with the legacy of being a hurdler.
Right.
But I guess then my frustration is why would she not, as a younger person who's engaged in self-improvement within the sort of like athletic context, why is this not an easily accessible subject?
I think that takes us right into Viktor Frankl, doesn't it? Man's search for meaning.
Okay,
I mean,
go ahead.
ultimately, isn't that? I mean, if at that point in time her sense of meaning is based on what she can produce,
Sure.
her sense of well-being is based on the way that she knows herself.
Yeah.
Her sense of meaning it's such a contrast to have a sense that my sense of meaning is going to be in how I research my capability. I have to enter into a complete different domain.
Yeah.
If I'm going to search into what it means to be efficient. Efficient means to pass forth through my skeleton and in such a way that it gives me the greatest outcome with the least amount of expenditure of muscular effort.
Okay. So let's go into that, because that seems like a relevant point here in terms of why an athlete might want to discover, like, efficiency is an easy concept to sell in some way.
It would coordination and efficiency would seem like they would be very, very easy. The difficulty is that it cannot be practiced and trained in explosive way. It can only be trained in quiet. It has to be in such a way that the nervous system. If we get really carried away, we can say that the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that's the evolutionary part of our brain, one of its greatest capacities is to make distinctions.
Okay.
And it's interested in novelty, it's interested in seeking, it's interested in curiosity, it's interested in improvisation. But if you're going to stimulate that part of the brain, then you have to be in question. You have to give yourself opportunities to explore differences, to be in contrast.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and so it's
not like in an exploratory process, basically, rather than just repetitive. The trainer's given me this, or I think that this will improve my technique, so I'm just going to do it 100 times.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
I mean, if you want to be the world's greatest chef, then the thing that you have to do is be able to make distinctions between too much salt. That means you have to have an exquisite ability to discern taste. Well, that's acquired. That's acquired.
Yeah, or a wine taster, or whatever.
Wine taster.
Yeah.
But that process is done quietly.
Yeah.
It's with small amounts.
Yeah.
And so which relates to the question that we know about, the relationship between stimulus and sensation. So when we do explosive work, we're always involved with high levels of stimulus.
Yeah.
But our nervous system, if it's going to refine itself and learn new behavior, must be quiet enough that it can discern differences, so that it can actually, in the discernment of differences, spread a new neurological image through the central nervous system and into the musculature, into the sense of self, in such a way a new expression can arrive. Otherwise, we will always continue to produce the compensations and the history.
Yeah, I was just going to say about that relates then to the compensations, but you said it so great. Yeah.
And that's what makes this work as remarkable as it is because Moshe actually figured this out through his years of experimentation with himself and the work he did with others. In the greatest capacity that the Feldenkrais practitioner has, interestingly enough, is not what they do. First of all, their ability is to establish an environment in which learning can take place. But the greatest capacity of a Feldenkrais practitioner is the means by which they can ask specific questions to the person. So the person, in their own self-reflection, can make new plans, new ways of organizing themselves come to fruition. It's the Feldenkrais practitioner's ability to ask specific questions, not to do the work for the person, but to lead the person into their own internal potential. And so that the skill of the practitioner that the practitioner continues to develop is, how do I ask more and more specific and refined questions for the person so the person can find more and more refined ways of engaging themselves specifically in the environment so they can be effective.
Yeah, which is turning on that process of the prefrontal cortex, questioning, being interested in themselves,
So,
rather than just being interested in results, being interested in themselves and how they are doing what they're doing to get those results.
Yeah, let's take another example from hockey.
Okay.
So in training with hockey, oftentimes skaters will skate a figure eight. They'll have the stick, they'll have the puck, and they skate in a figure eight. Mm-hmm. And so they have to control the puck as they skate, turn around themselves in a tight turn, come back across themselves, skate into the lower part of the turn, and they're having to handle the puck on the inside and the outside of the stick as they turn around themselves, because the figure eight forces them to go both ways around the turn.
Yeah.
Now, there's a point in time in almost every hockey player who doesn't have the skill will actually take they'll move in order to watch this puck on the stick. Mm-hmm. They'll actually lower their eyes and organize their eyes to connect with their hands so that they can see the puck.
Okay.
So now I've focused my attention in a small detail.
Yeah.
I'm no longer playing hockey. I'm only handling the puck. I've lost my connection to the entire space around me.
Yeah, right.
Now, so the question is how do you help a person, any athlete? It doesn't make any difference if it's basketball, football, soccer, whatever it is, because how is it that you help them find those moments in which they're not connected to the entirety of the space they're in?
Right. Yeah.
Because the hockey player, if they learn to organize themselves and carry their head, they can have only a micro moment of looking at the puck and then have the internal sense that they turn themselves. And then when they turn themselves, they've already turned their eyes to the ice. They're still sensing the whole of themselves, sensing the puck on the stick as they turn and keep themselves connected to the ice.
Yeah.
And that's a major thing. When I introduce that to a hockey player, then in that capacity, it makes all the difference in the world, because every hockey player has a preference as to which way they'll go around themselves in a circle.
Yeah.
Right? Which way they can skate freely, which way they can cross over freely. Yeah. But as soon as
probably won't practice the other way as much. Because it's
they don't. Well, of course, and that takes us. Don't get me started, because that takes us all the way back to the way a baby learns to crawl.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Go for it.
Well, a baby, say for example, my two babies, right? Mm-hmm. When they came out of the womb, they had a preference for rolling to the right.
Yeah.
They were flexed to the right. Mm-hmm. So here they have this internal preference of rolling themselves to the right. Which way are they going to go onto their stomach?
Yeah.
Well, they're not going to go on the stomach to the right, because their knees and their elbows are in the damn way.
Yeah.
So their other side, they'll roll to the left because their left side is open and available.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this system, this asymmetry in the system, that's carried from baby crawling, that maybe come all the way from the point of view of how the human cells divide in the system. Yeah. In the embryo. Yeah. That way that we have a spiral within ourselves exists within ourselves unless we study it.
Yeah.
And we carry that asymmetry into everything we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the question of just simply, if I'm a basketball player and I come around a screen, whether I turn myself easily to the basket because my spine turns easily in that direction, or whether I come around the screen and the preference of myself makes it so that I actually fade away because I can't really turn myself around myself.
I completely see what you're saying. Yeah, it's a great way of describing how our compensations or our biases restrict our ability. In a real sense, it's like, if I know I can't do something, I avoid putting myself in situations that would make me try and do it and perform badly. So if I think about basketball, if I can't do a layup from this particular spot or in this direction, I avoid it. But that
Right, of course.
that limits my navigation of a live action game. That reduces one of the possibilities.
One of my hockey players from a number of years ago, he couldn't cross over in a particular direction. Okay. So he was a defensive player, right? Yeah. And so instead of turning the efficient way that would to in the rink to go, because there's a part of the game where you take the puck from behind the net and then so you can set up the plays.
Yeah, yeah.
But because he couldn't turn it to his right around himself, he would have to go left out and around and back. So he would spend 0.2 of a second going in a direction that he didn't have to go because he couldn't go efficiently.
Yeah.
And that's 0.2 of a second that the game is being held up.
Yeah.
Because he can't freely go the other direction. Yeah. Now, he's in the NHL, so he's in the top hundredth of a percentile of players in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But
those things are still there within all of us. Yeah. Yeah.
In every case, there's no athlete that I couldn't examine that I wouldn't find some level, some discrepancy in their ability to be efficient.
Yeah. And would you say that in some ways the way that athletes train, or that we understand training in general, kind of creates those biases as well?
Well,
like,
I think
in terms of like a focus on effort for achievement, for example,
Well, I think that there's a profound lack of specificity and understanding for the way we train an athlete. Let's take a professional golfer that I work with.
Okay.
Right. So this man was trained in such a way and you watch golfers and you see that they fold themselves over their hip joints.
Okay.
And they lower themselves down to the golf ball.
Okay.
So they're in a sense that they are playing over the ball.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah. Which reduces their rotational ability in some way.
The first thing that it does is that it messes with their balance, because if you start with yourself from the top down and you bend over yourself and you put your center of gravity outside of yourself, your nervous system must in fact engage you to keep you from falling.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So the subtle way in which he's lowered himself to bring the club to the ball has already disturbed his ability to be efficient.
Yeah,
and he doesn't know it.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's what's trained in the field. You can go to the books today and you'll see the person putting the golf club in their hip joints and folding their torso over the top,
right,
and folding and now they talk about, at least they've come to the point where they talk about ground forces, but no one says to a person, keep your balance by folding yourself in such a way that you bring your sit bones back.
Yeah.
So that your center of gravity stays between your feet. And no one talks about, instead of lowering yourself to the ball, right? Is it possible that you can lift yourself to the ball?
Okay.
And that's a funny damn question.
Yeah.
Right?
I'd love for you to explain what you mean by that.
Well, I mean, obviously, if I'm standing and I ask most people when they're standing over their feet, aren't they? That means that their torso weight is above their feet. Yeah. Now, that makes them a very big upside down pendulum, doesn't it? That means all of the mass of their torso is wavering over the top of their feet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, it's a very, very, very funny idea. But what happens if instead of having the sense that you're wavering your body weight over your feet, you change the world from the point of view that you have the sense that the ground, and you organize your skeleton from the ground up and through yourself, so that you give yourself a more specific alignment through your skeleton that doesn't invite you to have to accommodate to yourself wavering, because you've built from within yourself a well-established architecture, a structure with which you're lifting yourself from the ground rather than falling down onto the ground. You've changed your entire sense of orientation.
Yeah.
Now take that into your activity.
Yeah.
Are you running over the ground when you're running? Or are you running in such a way that you have the sense that every time you touch the ground, that you're lifting yourself away from the ground?
Mm-hmm.
And you can go further and further. Now, if I wanted to bring the golf ball to me,
yeah,
then I'm going to fold myself in such a way that the ground comes up to me rather than me going down to the ground. But that's going to create a very, very different dynamic in the way that I've eccentrically organized my musculature for supporting me.
okay.
Now we can go back into one of the great golfers, the man who's won the most golf tournaments of all time in the PGA, or was before Tiger probably eclipsed him. But a guy named Sam Snead, you can go into his book, and he said, and Sam was known for playing barefooted as a kid.
Okay.
And he said, I've always played golf from the ground up.
Okay.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's very different. The whole scheme of organizing yourself from the ground up is an entirely different paradigm and scheme for action.
Okay.
Because the nervous system, first and foremost, always organizes the skeleton for action.
Yeah.
Always.
So, and this is something that we kind of touched on in our conversation before the interview. Like, would you say that this subject, a skeletal awareness, let's say, is something that is easy to access for people? Because it doesn't seem like it's something that is in common understanding or common knowledge. It's not a common practice for people to try and feel their skeletal organization. And obviously it's something that the Feldenkrais method introduces, but is it an easy process? Is it something that is accessible to people?
Well, I would say from the general public to the athletes that I work with, almost no one has a complete sense of their skeleton.
Yeah.
And until they can grasp the implicit sense of their skeleton,
yeah,
they're not as effective in the field of gravity as they could be.
Okay. Yeah.
And as the image of the skeleton becomes more and more intact within a person, and so that you have a sense that the forces are moving through the skeleton more efficiently, it means that the musculature is organized more and more effectively to produce activity from the ground. And let's be clear.
Mm.
It's not that we don't create weight into the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, Usain Bolt had the greatest, heaviest foot strike of any runner at all times. We have to understand ground forces, that there's a ground force reaction to the amount of force that's applied to the ground can lead to an equal and opposite reaction in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
The question is how do you learn to utilize the ground force reaction efficiently?
Yeah.
So it's not like Usain Bolt doesn't strike the ground.
Yeah.
But when he strikes the ground, he's already hit the ground with such a force that he's ready for the rebound. His system is ready to move away from that strike.
Got you. Yeah.
He's not pushing the ground away from him.
Yeah.
He's striking the ground in such a way that his system is prepared to move away from the ground.
I see. Yeah.
And so he's lifted himself away from the ground, utilizing the ground force through the skeleton. Yeah. And there's no man has ever done it better.
Yeah. So that makes perfect sense to me in an action where I don't know. I think I do understand what you're saying about, for example, the golf swing, the golfer, that he's standing. So there is an active exchange between his weight, the weight of himself, and the ground. And what you're saying is that there's a response from the ground back up the system, even in a static position. I think that's what you're saying.
Absolutely. And if a person wants a consistent way of beginning any movement, in such a way that it strikes within the system, it's almost a reflex arc. Instead of starting a movement with your hands or with your eyes or turning your head or moving your pelvis first.
Yeah.
If you're very, very clear and specific with the way that you initiate action from the ground, it will elicit within your system a highly effective coordinated chain of movement. And that just simply becomes more and more available.
Yeah. And that to me, oh, sorry.
Well, and it dissipates the compensations. It dissipates because it's much more pure in the way that the action is elicited.
Sure. Yeah. And it also seems like if following that route, one could get to a high level of functioning, a high level of skill, a high level of even power, explosive power, speed. They all seem possible concepts within that sort of that trajectory.
Well, what happens to the internal sense of dimension, space, timing, coordination, self-confidence when a person has the sense that they've resourced themselves in such a way that their support is clear? Now, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I get letters back from people who come to my awareness to movement classes, and they'll say, it's remarkable how much my sense of self-confidence has changed because of the way that I'm learning to support myself.
Right. Yeah.
We're not doing years of psychotherapy. Feldenkrais turned the world of psychotherapy upside down on its head.
Yeah.
He said, let's take the resources that you've developed and let's continue to help you find more resources so that you can integrate yourself in a way that you can meet the world in a way that meets the difficulty and uncertainty of the world in such a way that you thrive.
Yeah.
So it's not a story about spending your life going back into your history. It's a story about how can you take the immense capacity you have to refine your function.
Yeah.
And when you have this internal sense of self-reliance and support, take that into the world.
Yeah.
And watch what happens to your sense of self-confidence. Your self-confidence at that point in time is not based on the success you have, but based on what you experience within yourself that makes it so that you can enter into the world of success.
Yeah. And success or failure wouldn't impact that state or yourself in that experience. It wouldn't impact it in the same way.
Because you've entered into the world of autonomy, haven't you?
Yeah.
The deep internal sense of being composed from which you're going to meet difficulty.
Yeah.
And use difficulty as a basis to continue to learn rather than to use it as a basis to harm yourself and to be violent with yourself by the way that you treat yourself when you don't reach your outcomes.
Yeah.
If you have this sense of autonomy, then you're a willing explorer into what your potential is.
Yeah. And just to be clear, you're relating psychological autonomy, and let's say psychological with the addition of a physical experience, to good self-organization or good.
How can there be anything different?
Yeah.
We're not in a Cartesian world. We have our experience. There's no way in the world you are the sum total of your life experience at this point. And this is the basis from which your self-image has been developed.
Yeah.
Feldenkrais is clear. We act in accordance with our self-image, and that self-image governs the outcome of every activity.
Yeah.
Now, so if your self-image is continually refined, then that means that the entire process by which you activate yourself is refined. That means that you have a different resource to meet the world.
Yeah.
You're not limited to your history.
Yeah, and that's far outside or encompassing of many other elements of ourselves and life, as well as high performance and athletics and physical capability that spills over into the way we live. It's a much bigger, a broader subject at that point.
Well, if you have a sense of being whole with yourself, and you have a sense that dimensionally you have a capacity to meet the changing world, then you're physically, emotionally. I mean, I don't want to break up all those terms because you are capable.
Yeah.
It's not a third person explanation. A person who gets up off the table and says it feels wonderful.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. You have to, the first thing I'm going to do is direct them into, well, who feels wonderful?
Yeah.
I feel wonderful.
Yeah.
I feel wonderful. And so the person actually has a sense of possessing their own innate capacity.
Yeah.
So that they don't dissociate and they can bring that sense of wholeness into the world.
Yeah. 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 And I think that this is actually, interestingly, a key subject within the context of performance.
Absolutely.
To do with where we get our sense of value from, like you were saying, the man's search for meaning. Like, I think that this is actually an interesting place to maybe wrap up the discussion, that, in some way, bringing one sense of self or enhancing one sense of self is a great way of I don't know, affecting our overall psychology of athletic performance, or something like that.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I mean, and obviously, if that is my state, that I'm in the world of open curiosity,
Yeah.
that means I'm going to be in the process of exploring my potential. If I'm a golfer, I'm going to be in a different set of questions rather than just going through my drills.
Yeah.
I'm going to actually be in the place where I'm learning, paying attention, and I know how to distinguish from the differences that I experience. I begin to know how to refine my own function.
Yeah.
And like Feldenkrais said many years ago, he said, I'm going to be your last teacher because you're going to learn from me how to learn for yourself.
Yeah.
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 Well, there isn't a higher, a more noble process for a person, which is to learn how to refine their own function.
Yeah. Yeah.
At any level of performance.
And I think, like, just as you say that, it occurs to me that it not only, I can see the benefit of it, but it's actually enjoyable to engage with your activity in that way. Whereas sometimes kind of repetitive practice or training doesn't feel enjoyable. It's not a joy because you're not engaged with the learning process within it.
When I go to a professional golfing event and I watch the way that most players practice, it's extraordinarily discouraging.
Yeah.
I mean, it is just, they're just beating balls.
Yeah.
And hoping that process of beating balls is going to produce something within them that they're going to find as something that they can go to, that they're going to be able to go out on the course with so that they can play.
Yeah.
But it is completely mindless. They've got a coach who gives them the suggestion and that. But it's very, very different if you engage an athlete in the question, what did you notice? And then ask another specific question. Is it possible, and have them include something into the moment? My son's a basketball player.
Yeah.
And so he developed a way of shooting as a child, because I had a long basketball history, and so I made it so that he didn't get to do like all the other kids and go out and just start flinging the balls up. But he learned a very specific way that the ball passed, that he could sense the center of the basketball, and he brought his skeleton up and through the ball, and there was a way in which he could repeat that, and from that then he gradually moved to the point where he moved further and further out. Now he's playing basketball at a university. In the course of the time of the year that he was at the university, he began to change skeletally in such a way that he became skeletally inefficient. In the sense that he didn't have the clear skeletal alignment and the clear directness through his skeleton that he had before he went to the university. Now, how all that happened, I don't care. I mean, the efficiency of whatever. And so he comes back and we spend no more than 20 or 30 minutes with helping him realign himself so that the movement passes through him in the clearest skeletal, most efficient manner. And now it's like he's so zeroed in. Because that sense of zeroing in means that he has a sense of integrity in the way that he senses himself. that he can move in a direct way
Yeah.
towards the outcome of making that little round thing go through that little round hoop.
Yeah. And
in a way that
I was
moves
just
it
going to
forward.
say, yeah, I was just going to say, and how you related that to hockey before is that in some way that efficiency of movement leaves his additional resources to bringing his awareness into the game. You know,
then all the other parts of the game become even more available to him.
Yeah. Really nice.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, this work, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my views on those.
Yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed talking to you about this. Is there anything that you would want to say? I mean, you say so many things that I actually would talk for hours with you about this. But is there anything that has kind of occurred to you that you think is really important for someone that is interested in high performance sports or using themselves in a very physical way in relation to the Feldenkrais method? You know, like what advice would you give someone?
Well, I mean, the main advice is to really have a conversation with your Feldenkrais practitioner about how they can help you become more efficient, not to help you to move better or to be more, to have greater range of motion.
Yeah.
But what do I need to learn in order to become more efficient? And how do I learn to utilize awareness through movement as a process that will enhance my overall sense of efficiency?
Yeah.
Okay. I think those are
That's
the
most
important
point.
questions.
Yeah. And I think, you just gave the example of your son and why that's relevant to performance. So I think that's a nice connection there.
You can imagine what a pleasure it is for me that my 20-year-old son occasionally calls me and says, "Dad, can we have a lesson?"
Yeah, I can.
So I do a Zoom call with him because of the various vagaries and experiences that he has, and every once in a while he calls and says, is it possible for me to have a lesson, so that I get to keep involving him in this question so that he keeps learning how to to discern for himself.
And that's interesting, kind of given our earlier kind of like question about the hurdler that only came across this at a later point in her experience, and then she missed the benefit of it to the performance of her chosen skill, whereas your son's got access to this in the crucial point of that skill performance.
Well, she's in trouble because right now she keeps hurting herself in a yoga class. and
that's a different subject.
Found a Feldenkrais practitioner who's helping her actually learn how to make some of the movements that she has historically done that hurt her.
Yeah, which is another type of high performance, I guess, but maybe another conversation.
Yes, well,
great. Okay, all right, well, thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate your time, and if anyone wants to get in contact with you, do you have any
they can email me at jeff@insidemoves.org, or they can go to my website, insidemoves.org, and I have an extensive library of about 275 lessons that are ATM lessons that are by subscription, but there's a way in which the lessons are taught that lend to this specificity of organization. So
and do you teach live classes as well?
Every Wednesday morning at Pacific time at 10 o'clock, I have a class, and every Thursday evening at 7 o'clock Pacific time, I have a class. So that between those two, I can sort of cover the Europe and Eurasia.
Okay. Well, there you go. So, there you go. Yeah. If anyone's interested, I guess the information's on your website of how to access
it's on my website.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. It's been a pleasure. And I look forward to speaking again at some point.
All right. Great. Thank you so much.